Our friends at BibleProject.com are world-class explainers. They take the books of the Bible and the great themes of the Bible and make them visual so you can get a better understanding of what's going on. If you're a fan of short, colorful videos like the ones we try to do here, you'll love BibleProjects.com. So give that site a look sometime. But for now, here's an excerpt from one they've put together on our topic for today: the meaning of God's covenants in the Bible.
If you've been around Christians, you've probably heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much, and that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Right, and this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as his partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just one or two humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and he makes a new partnership with them called a covenant. And in a covenant, God makes promises, and then in exchange asks his partner to fulfill certain commitments. And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew his partnership with everybody else.
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption, and Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again. Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though he knows humans won't be.
So, it turns out there's a lot more to the story of Noah than they told us when we were kids. And make no mistake, this story is most often told as a children's story, so we don't tend to look too deeply. And sure, we know it's about a good man, a big ark, a bad rainstorm, and a pretty rainbow. But there's a little more to be found in the text, and I predict that if you haven't visited Noah's story lately, surprises are in store as we learn what the Noah narrative tells us about covenant. So you know the basics, right? Early in Genesis, early in human history, we're told the world had become particularly evil. God decided to do a full system reboot, and you recall he chose Noah's family to ride out the storm that would envelop the earth and to start over again. The ark was designed simply to float, to keep the family and animals safe and set them back down when the storm subsided. And you'll remember how Noah sent out the dove and it found a safe haven. So Noah's family disembarked and made a sacrifice, the first altar sacrifice in the Bible. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are the key to the rest of the Bible. These chapters are all about basic questions that will determine all the rest of our religion. A primer on the meaning of life. First, they tell you who God is, a creator, someone who wants our friendship. And then we learn about who we are, which is made in his image, but prone to rebellion, which we call sin. The narratives in Genesis explain these things the most powerful way possible, through unforgettable stories and images. Why do we sin? What kind of emotions cause the worst sins? Why are the nations scattered and speak different languages? And then there's this ark story that tells us something else. Not only does God care about personal sin, he cares about widespread sin. He cares about nations, about the world. And sins have consequences on the macro level as well as the micro level. That's the part of the story we all pick up on. How could we not? But there's more here. The ideas of covenant and grace enter the story too. And those ideas are powerful, dominant for the rest of Scripture. Let's begin reading Genesis 9:8. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." So the big idea this week is the idea of covenant. It actually meant a lot more in the ancient world to the first readers of this story than it probably does to us. There weren't courts. There weren't legal documents. You made a covenant and it was dead serious business. It was the only way to hold anyone to anything. A covenant is simply a binding agreement between two parties. This one, the Noahic covenant, is the simplest in the Bible. It's actually really a promise, and that's how we talk about it. When I was little, I'd be left at my grandmother's house on Collier Road, back behind Piedmont Hospital, when my mom would go shopping at Lenox Square. I was about 5, and Mom would tell me, "If you behave yourself today, I'll bring you a surprise." In a sense, that was just a promise. I knew she'd bring the surprise, and she wasn't going to be making phone calls all day to see if I was really behaving. But I understood it as a covenant. We make promises to small children, and we want them to learn we're faithful. Mom and Dad can be trusted. But that same grandmother grew up in a little town called Culloden, Georgia, in central Georgia. Her father made a deal with her. If she graduated from high school, which was an achievement in the early 20th century, he'd buy her a car or a college education, her choice. That was a true covenant. She had to fulfill her part of the deal, and then he would come through with the prize. She did, graduated from high school, and she took the car and regretted it for the rest of her life. Wished she'd taken the college education. See, her father was faithful, but that didn't mean she learned to make the best choices. That's how it is with God's covenant. He's always faithful. He gives profound blessing, but we come to regret what we do with that blessing more often than not. This covenant with Noah is more like a promise because it's one-sided. It's something God will do and doesn't require us really to do anything. And it's really the first great example of grace. God is saying, "This is my gift to you. The world will not be destroyed by water henceforth." Now, to you, that might sound like your big brother saying, "I'm giving you a gift. I'm not going to give you a sound thrashing today. Thanks, you're all heart." But understand what this meant to ancient readers. They lived in a world in which natural forces were fierce and merciless. Several ancient religions have flood narratives like this one because flooding was a deep fear, and it seemed as if the gods must be punishing them for something. So our first point is, God is gracious. Through the rest of the Bible, we'll see that theme expand. We'll see just how wide and how deep that grace is. But this is the first real indication of it. Notice something else that I've always missed, and you may have too. This is the one covenant that is with all of creation, not just people. God will make covenants with individuals, like David, with nations, like the Hebrews, through Abraham, with families, like Abraham's. But in this case, he makes a covenant with all living things. It's a covenant between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. That's what you'd call an all-encompassing agreement. It covers every living creature until the end of time. No loopholes, even if Noah had taken a pair of lawyers onto the ark. This very explicitly tells us how God values his creation, particularly that part of it that has life and breath. There's a Christian school of thought about dominion, how God has given us dominion over the earth. Sometimes it's used by those who don't value the world of nature, the environment. This passage reaffirms what God arranged with his first children. Here is the earth. It's precious. Care for it. Now, about that bow. Yes, the bow. Did you notice that's what Scripture calls it? It's clearly said in the clouds, comes after the rain. It's a rainbow. But the ancient word is for the kind of bow you'd use to hunt. The rainbow bears its shape, so there's a kind of poetry to that. Many scholars believe that when God says, I've set my bow in the clouds, he's saying, as long as you see this sign, he set down his weapon. Covenants always signal the end of a war. The parties sit down and sign agreements arranged for peace. This is the grace of God. Mankind has declared war on him. God has shown his righteous judgment, but he has tempered it with grace, mercy, and the most visually beautiful promise we could possibly imagine. As we enter into this season of Lent, which has begun this week, it's a time to reflect on the many ways we all fall short. It probably took 5 minutes for someone in Noah's family to miss the mark somehow after the ark had come to rest. Sin is deeply wrapped up in our DNA. We know that. God knows that. And God says, I still want to work with you. I still want to cooperate toward the goal of making Earth a better place, and you a better person. As the rainbow follows the rain, I will always see a better, brighter tomorrow for you. I will be here for you. Do we have a deal? That's what it means to live in covenant. Thanks for listening.